So at 9:30pm GMT over on the Omegon Plays channel and on Twitch, I shall be streaming some Euro Truck Simulator 2. It will be the final event of the World of Trucks event, delivering racing gear to various places around Europe, and I believe Manchester is the target today. Link to the Twitch channel and the streaming question below. Now today we're going to talk about something that came from the Hansard Society audit of political engagement. For those that don't know, the Hansard Society are those fancy people that keep the minutes for all the parliamentary sessions. They have been around for quite some time, 20 years near-ish. During that time they also conduct a number of surveys and reports. These indicate certain political leanings and what the public generally start to feel, the consensus as it were. Obvious issues arise within these studies, and we're going to focus certainly on that when we get to it, because a number of the questions seem a bit loaded, and this bothers me. The questionnaires seem less interested in trying to get people to explain what they think, and instead focus on leading the audience towards an answer that they want. I don't care for that. So the article comes from The Guardian. Whether you want to trust that or not is irrelevant, I guess, because the study is also linked below, so it doesn't matter too much. So we will be addressing paragraphs from the article, and I'll also show some of the answers and results from the study itself while I do that. The UK public is increasingly disenchanted with MPs and government, and ever more willing to welcome the idea of authoritarian leaders who would ignore Parliament, a long-running study of attitudes to politics has shown. I think the increasingly disenchanted with politicians and government is a growing trend around the world, one that can certainly be attributed to not just the increasing divide politically, but also the fact that governments repeatedly make promises for what they will do once they are elected, and then they don't enact the thing they say they'll do. It is a cliche at this point that a politician, when on the election campaign, will make a bunch of very outlandish statements about what they say they'll do once they are elected. But once elected, they drive right into the middle of the road, because now they have a problem. While they have the power, potentially the power, to enact what they said they would do in their manifesto, they now have to either get the whole party in line to get the votes they need, or they have to compromise. In the UK, the best example of that would be tuition fees. That was a compromise. Sorry to those who have to pay $9,000 a year. Very sorry about that. But I did warn all my friends that would happen. They ignored me. We're not friends anymore. Not for that reason. Another great example would be Brexit. In fact, Brexit is the pinnacle of government betrayal, and I'm not going to be diving into that quagmire today, but I will address it briefly in the next paragraph of the article. Amid the Brexit chaos, overall public faith in the political system has reached a nadir not previously seen in the 16-year history of the Hansard Society's audit of political engagement, lower even than the depths of the crisis over MPs' expenses. Two of my favourite scandals that came from the MP's expenses was that one MP claimed for a duck pond, was it a house for a duck pond, and another, her husband, was ordering pornography and claiming back with it. That was hilarious. It certainly brought a smile to my face, and I'm sure a happy ending for him until he was rumbled. I guess you can consider what he was doing a danger wank, except he got caught. Almost 3/4 of those asked said the system of governance needed significant improvement, and other attitudes emerged that challenged core tenets of our democracy, the audit's authors stated. The study, compiled annually by the Democracy Charity, found that when people were asked whether Britain needs a strong ruler, willing to break the rules, 54% agreed and only 23% said no. 54% of people then are wrong. And I would point out, and this is where I think political leaning plays a key part, because where you're deriving your sample pool from, I'm sure you did this reasonably well, but based on political beliefs, based on how people voted in more recent elections and referendums, some people are still quite bitter over what they don't get, in that they did not win. So some will say agreed, some will say no, but then some people get what they want and will still say that because they're not getting what they want based on, for example, that aforementioned referendum. I, personally, would vote no, because the rules exist for a reason. Parliamentary process exists for a reason. Democracy as it is, our constitution as it is, exists for a reason. It has survived centuries and still stacks up to modern society. It's just a shame, and it really is a shame, that even though MPs have had ample opportunity to say what they want, they cannot get a consensus through Parliament for quite a number of things. 8, to be exact. I want to point out a dangerous precedent that could occur. Say the 54% agreed, and that was what someone tried to do, to break the rules to get their ideas through. That's not indicative of a strong ruler, that is an indicator of a corrupt ruler, doing what they think is best for the people. That is why democracy as we have it exists the way it exists. Oh, and I can't help but notice the 23% that were undecided. Congratulations for not having principles. In all, 42% of respondents agreed with the idea that many national problems could be dealt with more effectively if the government didn't have to worry so much about votes in Parliament, which, while a dangerously high number, is slightly misleading, because within the same question segment, 50% voted it would be risky to give the government more power to deal directly with many of the country's problems, which is a few points higher than the 42%. I know we don't like dealing with people who win things, but I think the 50% have it. Let's just say the ayes have it, the ayes have it. And I also tend to agree with that notion, in the sense that if the government has more power than it already has, it could just do whatever it wants, whenever it wants. This is why we have the current electorate system we have. The representation is important. If you don't have in your party enough votes to get something through, then you then have to play the game. You then have to make compromises. You then have to make it work for the majority of the country as opposed to your party. I may as well mention this now. I'm not overly fond of party politics, yet I know party politics crops up a considerable amount. It's a shame that those elected to represent us think they know better when they don't. It has been proven repeatedly, by the way, that they are at best arrogant retards. And I would also like to now go back to the 42%. Many of the country's problems could be dealt with more effectively if the government didn't have to worry so much about votes in Parliament, by saying it would be very undemocratic to have any system in place like that. I would never embrace such a system. In fact, I am directly opposed to a system where the government had more power and didn't have to be held accountable for anything they wanted to introduce. We then have to trust people who have very interesting motivations. If they didn't have to worry about votes in Parliament, then they more than likely won't have to worry about the votes from their constituencies. At that point, they are no longer a democratic government, are they? If they are not voted in by the people they are supposed to represent, then they are no longer a government. They are an authoritarian state. That sounds eerily familiar to something else going on right now. But thankfully we're not going to give up more of our sovereign rights, so it doesn't matter too much. Ruth Fox, the director of the Hansard Society, said skepticism about politics, a feeling that the system was rigged, and a willingness to consider radical solutions was a potentially dangerous combination. And she's quite right. But I guess if people get pushed hard enough in a direction or get let down too many times, they're going to become alienated. It is an inevitability, and this is one of the major issues in politics. People only think about their party winning. They don't think about damage done to those that lose. Now, yes, maybe they don't have to consider it, but they have to recognise, while they have the largest majority in that Commons, or in the Senate, or in Congress, or wherever it is your government resides, you still have to find a way to enact your policy and try and get more people to understand your position, or work with them to get something that everyone can agree on, which is getting harder and harder with people creating a greater divide, the left-right divide, that, quite frankly, I couldn't care less about. My issue with politics is whether or not it is correct or not, which is a rather naive approach apparently. I disagree fundamentally on that notion. I firmly believe either an issue is correct or it is not. You do not need to take a left or right stance. If your correct answer falls on the right, then it falls on the right. If it falls on the left, it falls on the left. How is this difficult? The problem is, that kind of mentality is not represented in politics for me. So I'm alienated, I guess. Do I care? No. Do I want an authoritarian state? No. Do I want the government to have more powers to do stuff without being voted? No. I want the government to be held accountable, held to the mark at all costs. I want everything they do to be scrutinised. I want everything to be held to account as I stated. I want it all to be questioned. Because that way we know when they have to make some rather tricky decisions. Let's go with war-related. That's a very big one. They can answer the questions that many people wanted to ask them in committees, and if they screw up, they should be held to account for that. How Tony Blair isn't in prison yet is a miracle. Anyway, I will link the article and the Hansard archive links anyway. If you are at all interested in reading both, by all means do so. It is quite interesting. The study itself, by the way, oh dear, very interesting. Perhaps I'll devote some time on a stream with Trups to going through it, because I think it's damning. So if I don't see you tonight over on the Omegon Plays channel or on Twitch, I hope you'll have a lovely Tuesday, and thank you all for listening.